You're listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall. Folks, we are back on Discovering the Truth with Dan Duvall. If you're watching on YouTube, you will notice that my beard is missing. I have shaved it off for the first time in, over 2 years, believe it or not. But, well, sometimes we just need to shift. And here's the truth. Some of you guys, after you hear this program, are also going to need to shift. Because today we're talking about a subject that is going to be a bit of a painful experience for some of us, because we're going to be talking about narcissism. And to help me talk about this subject, I've brought on Dr. David Orison. Now, he's been a pastor for over 30 years and is the executive director of Grace for the Heart, a ministry dedicated to proclaiming the sufficiency of Jesus Christ for all aspects of Christian life. He has served in the Evangelical Free Church and the United Presbyterian Church and holds a PhD in theology. Now, he's also written a book recently, and it's on the subject of narcissism. It's actually called Narcissism in the Church. Dr. Orison, welcome to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall.
Hey, thanks. It's good to be here.
Well, it's really good to have you. And I'm really excited to be having this conversation. You know, the more I've learned about narcissism, the more I'm able to see it and discern it. And like many others, I think that, for a long time before I began to do some of my own research into the subject, I was among those that would encounter this thing and not know what to call it, not even necessarily knowing what to do with it or how to handle it. And it really does affect many of us. Many people are actually survivors of narcissistic abuse. Many people have, had the unfortunate circumstance of working for years under a narcissistic boss. They have submitted under the heavy hand of narcissistic personalities, and they have the battle scars, that are still bleeding sometimes, metaphorically speaking. But yet we don't even necessarily know what it is. And so I want to begin this conversation by letting you tell us a little bit about your background. Explain what narcissism is and how you became aware of the issues that narcissistic personalities create.
Very good. Well, like you say, I've been a pastor for a long time. So as a pastor, you begin to learn about people. If you care about people at all, if you care about, how you're reaching them, and you learn about their kids, you learn about how they interact in their marriages and all those kinds of things, and how they think to a certain extent. I think pastoring, to do it right, takes a great deal of empathy. And empathy means you connect with the emotions and the thinking patterns of other people, and sometimes bring those in, to your own detriment, but at least, that's part of the deal. About 15, 16 years ago, something like that, I was involved in a church where the congregation had been through a lot of legalism, a lot of legalistic teaching. We had one couple in the church that had some unique marriage problems, and I started to do some counseling with them and worked with them in a point where I came out frustrated every time and could not figure out what in the world was going on. And I think you said it well. Those that encounter narcissists often come away saying, what the heck was that? It doesn't make sense. You find that you're asking, who thinks like that? Who says those kinds of things? Who does that stuff? And I was looking at, the man in this relationship, and I really puzzled as to how he was interacting with his wife. What I found was that she would say something, opening herself, and he had some incredible way of pushing a certain button, and she would just explode. She would just explode in rage and grief and, I mean, overwhelming crying. And it was strange. It was just really strange. I mean, it was the point where I'm looking at, is this demonic? What is going on? And by the way, which one of them has the demon? I'm trying to figure that out. So I know that opens another whole area of discussion. But
so he's making her look crazy.
he is making her look crazy. So, and I didn't realize that that's what was happening, but that's exactly what was happening. He knew exactly how to push her button at just the right time to make her look crazy, to make her look like she was the radical one. She was the one that was way off. Well, I started looking at him, and then he would also call me. He would call me. Get this. Now, this is, you and I were talking before about, maybe why pastors should be careful of counseling. He would call me at 10:30 at night. Okay. Well, never a simple conversation. So by midnight, we're finally, I'm finally able to extricate myself and say, okay, it's time, we got to quit. And I began to think, what in the world is going on with this guy? This is strange. I'm being manipulated, I'll tell you this before I go on, but one of the things that I teach when I teach counselors how to deal with narcissists is I say, one of the ways that a counselor or somebody who works with people can guess, or at least begin to suspect that you're working with a narcissist, is if you have fantasies about killing your client. If you have fantasies and daydreams basically about how much easier your life would be as a counselor if this guy got hit by a truck, you might be dealing with a narcissist, because what it's doing is it's revealing a whole lot of frustration. He's not somebody you're working with in a normal way. He's manipulating you instead of learning from you. And as soon as I say that, which is fascinating, whenever I talk to somebody who's involved in counseling, they're all like, because they've had those thoughts and they can't admit them. You don't dare admit those kinds of thoughts.
Not going to admit it.
Anyway, so I went to Barnes and Noble, and I mean, not exactly the place I'd normally go for counseling materials, but I used to like to go there and get a cup of coffee and read a book because they were very gracious and let me do that. And I found a book called Malignant Self-Love by Sam Vaknin, $45 paperback. Okay, just a small book, not anything exciting, where he basically explains his life as a narcissist. And I was overwhelmed. I started reading this, and the thing that just really connected with me was this one phrase. It's a paraphrase, but it's close. He says, the most common response to narcissistic abuse is rage.
Wow.
And I thought, bingo, that's what I'm seeing. This uncontrolled emotional response it's full of confusion, it's full of desperation, it's passion, it's impotence. I mean, it's everything. I have this thing I absolutely must fix in my life, and I can't because I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on. This lady, when she first talked to me, she believed the whole thing was her fault. She really did. She believed it was her fault. And as it worked out, no, it wasn't her fault. She was the victim of a long series, nearly 20 years of an abusive marriage, where he never laid a hand on her. He's a good Christian, never laid a hand on her, never hardly raised his voice to her. I mean, there's nothing overt that you could point to that he was doing to her. That was my introduction to narcissism. Started doing some reading, started talking to other people, and over, I got the one response that fits exactly what I'm experiencing. Or, you're describing my mother, that's my boss. Like you said, it's in multiple relationships, and it's this amazing ability to that some people have to get into almost your very soul and start to tweak and poke and prod and manipulate until they've taken pretty much everything that you've got. And actually, the people on the closer to the end of a narcissistic relationship will say that they are just drained. They just have nothing. Since that time, again, as I've taught counselors, I say, if you find that you've got a husband and wife that come in for marriage counseling, and she just sits and she just agrees or she nods and she just doesn't seem to have anything to contribute, look for narcissistic abuse. Might not be from the husband, very well might be, but it could be your mother or a mother-in-law. Somebody is draining that energy, that life. Somebody's taking that away. And it's a consumptive process. In fact, try to look for scriptural parallels. And one of the ones I found recently that I thought was very helpful was the whole concept, the Old Testament concept of the locust, the devourer, who comes in and takes everything. And the nice part of that is the promise of the Lord to restore what the devourer has taken. So there's a real hopeful, positive, in terms of connection to the Lord that we can look forward to.
So, okay. In a single sentence, what is narcissism?
So narcissism is the devotion to a superior image, okay, and I'll explain that. Devotion to a superior image that uses the depersonalization of other people to support that image.
Wow.
Okay. So I'll give you a little background, and I think this will be helpful for a lot of people. The general consensus among scholars is that a narcissist develops very early in life as a child who doesn't connect with parents for some reason. So the typical one is the abandoned child, the child whose parents are alcoholics or drug addicts or gone all the time or something like that. But you get the same phenomenon sometimes with a child that's doted on, a child that gets extra attention. And basically, it's the child who's told, and I developed this a few years ago because I had a kind of remembered a case that I dealt with years and years ago. A child who's told that they're not valuable when they are themselves. They're only valuable when they're not themselves. So this is the little boy, okay, who gets scolded for getting dirty, who gets dressed up in nice clothes and paraded around and told to be quiet in front of other people. That's the only time that he gets attention. If he gets those nice clothes dirty, then he gets punished. But it's the nature of little boys to get dirty. So now what he has to learn is, I can't be myself. As myself, I'm not valuable. I'm not special. I'm not important. If you think in terms of the abandoned child, that's fairly easy to see. The abandoned child is only wanted, and abandoned basically somebody who has parents, but doesn't get any time or energy from the parents. Only wanted when it serves the purpose, the parent's purpose. But that's also true of the smothered child, right? The smothered child is being controlled also for the parents' purposes. So, here, let me fix that for you. Here, let me do that for you. I just saw a little meme on the little engine that could, and the little engine is at the bottom of the hill and it's saying, Mom, can you push me? That's the little engine that needs mom to push, because what he's learned is, I can't get up that hill. I can't do that. So the doted child, the one that gets all the attention, all the special, is also told that he can't do it on his own. See, he can't be successful. It's an interesting, you think, well, boy, those are two extremes. No, they're not. They're really two sides of the same coin. And both of them can breed the narcissist. So the narcissist says, As a little child says, if I want acceptance and love, I have to play the game. I have to be somebody I'm not, because when I'm me, nobody likes me. And that's, I keep going on tangents here, but that's one of the real tricks of understanding narcissism in the most practical sense. Today, if you ask a person on the street, what is narcissism? They'll say, well, it's somebody who loves themselves. Not at all. The narcissist hates himself. The narcissist loves the image of himself that he's putting in front of everybody else and expects you to love it also. That explains all kinds of things in narcissistic relationships, by the way.
Well,
Go
what
ahead.
you're saying makes so much sense. Now, I mentioned this just briefly to you, Dave, but at Bride Ministries, we have a huge outreach, right, to survivors of satanic ritual abuse and other types of abusive backgrounds. And this kind of treatment is prolific across the board because, one, there are no boundaries for the children. Physical, sexual, psychological abuse is actually planned out and charted so that they can be abused to the point of shattering, and then they begin to manifest different personalities to survive the different types of abuse they receive. Now, in that case, when a person has different personalities just to survive the abuse, what are they learning?
Yeah.
I have to learn to be someone else.
Yes.
In order to survive. And the only way to please these people that are so demonized and evil that they would do this to me is to be this other image. It's a breeding ground for narcissistic personalities, which is why I see a lot of survivors exhibiting narcissistic characteristics. And it's not necessarily that anyone wants to, or they've signed up and said, I just want to be narcissistic, but the way you explain it helps so much.
No, nobody grows up saying, I want to be a narcissist. Although there's a little hint of that, because narcissism is the way to get ahead in a world like ours. So the narcissistic track is a successful track in our culture. And so there is some of that even non-narcissists know, that they have to be almost ruthless in dealing with people, for example. You have to be a mean boss in order to get your people to do their job, that kind of thing. So we learn some of that. But I think you're right. Nobody grows up and says, I'm going to be a narcissist because it's going to work well for me. Narcissists are not happy people. They're trapped people. They're fearful people. They live in fear all the time that they're going to get exposed, that people are going to find that little kid that's still hiding under the bed, that if they do, then what are they going to find? How are they going to be able to manipulate me? Narcissists manipulate other people so that other people don't manipulate them.
Wow.
They're afraid of being out there. Narcissists have no empathy. By the way, that is by definition. I have had people tell me, well, my narcissist, I try to encourage people to say it that way, my narcissist is very empathic. And I say, well, if he is, then he's not a narcissist. Because by definition, narcissists don't connect with other people's emotions. However, a narcissist can be a student of other people's emotions and can watch your emotions and mirror that back to you so that you feel like they're accepting, you feel like they're listening, you feel like they're understanding. And you'll just eat that up because you like it, but you're honestly getting nothing from them. And what I'll have wives especially say, and I'll explain why it's mostly men, but wives especially will say, I see now that there was never any love in the relationship. There was always this need for control and affirmation. The narcissist needed attention, needed to be taken care of, and would do whatever it took until I gave him that. So in the beginning of a relationship, narcissists are very friendly, very gracious people. I've met narcissist pastors who are the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And you think, man, this is, well, in fact, you feel honored to be in their presence because look, I've had one of the most narcissistic pastors that I've known invite me to lunch. And I thought, boy, that's really nice. I mean, here I am in a little church. He's got a great big church, and we've had a nice conversation, and it was very personable. I also worked with his staff members who were terribly abused and just abandoned when the time came well, in fact, one of his guys came and disagreed with him one time. The pastor had made a decision, and the staff member went in and said, I think this is not a good decision. He says, okay, you're fired. And this was somebody he had known as a friend since seminary days. What? The guy was shocked. And he says, no, you can't work here if you're going to disagree with me. That was it. Wow. But when he was lunch with me, he was very gracious, very kind. And if you talk with wives, the courting days with a narcissist are fantastic. The guy's the most caring, gentle, loving person they've ever met. They listen. They'll say, I don't understand. He knew everything about me. He loved me. He heard everything that I said. He could feed it all back. And now I don't know if he even knows my name. It's like, what happened? Well, that's narcissistic technique to get to know somebody. These people they do it subconsciously. It's natural. By the time they're adults, this is well-rehearsed behavior. It's, if I can say it this way, it's not phony. Okay, it's absolutely real, honest, core behavior from these people. Now, are they manipulating? Are they, facetious in the caring that they give? Of course, but they appear very gracious. They're very kind people. Sometimes. On the other end, not so much. So I'm not sure how we got into that track, but that's an interesting track.
Well, because you're a wellspring of wisdom on the subject. So
open up.
It's basically like trying to fill up a cup of water from a geyser. It's like, oh no. So let me ask you this, okay? From a technical standpoint, we're talking about narcissism in a bit of generality. Now, there is a technical psychological diagnosis for narcissism as a condition.
Right.
And then there's narcissism in a more general sense of behavior patterns. And you discuss that tension in your book. And so I just want to give you a little bit of time to break that down for us.
Yeah. That's important. And it where that really hits the road is when a wife or anyone actually in a narcissistic relationship will go to the narcissist and say, you're a narcissist. Yeah. Or if they go to a counselor and they say, my husband, my coworker, my pastor is a narcissist. Well, in order to have an objective diagnosis, I mean, you need a set of criteria. You need some rules. What does that mean in this? Now, actually, the criteria for determining narcissism, I usually use the DSM-4 because I like the way that that's written out. I mentioned that in my book. It's fairly plain. It's simple. It's something that you'll see several of those in any narcissist or manipulative person that They say that there's supposed to be 5 of 9 in order to diagnose somebody as a narcissist. When I have actually, and I have done this, sent somebody who I thought was a narcissist to a professional counselor, and I don't consider myself I've gotten paid for counseling, but I don't consider myself a professional counselor. That's not my training. My training is theology. But those, who are supposed to be in control of that area of our culture, if you send to them, they very rarely will find the person to be a narcissist, because in their book, a narcissist is a Ted Bundy, and a narcissist is the Unabomber. A narcissist is the BTK killer. I mean, it's these extreme people. Those are the only real narcissists in their books, and I understand that. They have a certain amount of time, a certain amount of energy. You can't find narcissism in everyone. It'd be terrible. But at the same time, and I use this in my book too, because I think it's important, not every flu out there is influenza, but the people are still sick. Right? So something's happening. and maybe it's not exactly the influenza virus, but it's close enough that we can use that word in a helpful way. Now, I understand that if you're going to go to court and you're going to try to accuse somebody of, having, a psychological, problem called narcissism, you better, cross your T's and dot your I's and have everything just right. So I tell people, don't do that. In fact, as much as possible, don't use the words. Describe the symptoms. Describe how this person had no concern about using you. How this person stole from you without any concern about, what it would mean. To describe what happened. Don't try to label with the word, because we're wide open for that, for people saying, oh, no, it's not narcissism. At the same time, we do use words like flu. We do say, so-and-so is paranoid, even though we're not diagnosing them with paranoia. We understand that there's a popular version, of that. And so I don't see any reason why not to use the term. I'd love to come up with a better term. I really would. I've tried. In fact, we had some fun on my blog one time of trying to come up with different words. And oh my goodness. The only thing is, I told people, try not to cuss too strongly.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Use the worst words you can think of. But narcissism encompasses a lot of the things that we see. The other thing that probably ought to be tossed in is I think everybody agrees that there's a narcissistic continuum. There is a behavior that is narcissistic that non-narcissists do. Okay. So, for example, I've got a good friend and I love him. He's one of these very abrupt people. He'll be having lunch or coffee with me, and all of a sudden he stands up, looks at his phone. I've got to go. Now, it's not something on his phone that means he has to go. It's not like he's got an appointment or he's got a call. It's just he's ready for the conversation to end. And so he's done. Now, I could look at that and I could say, wow, yeah, but, what about me? It's a narcissistic behavior that I don't see as a narcissist. That's not who he is. We all have those kinds of things, particularly when we're traumatized, particularly when we're under stress. You mentioned someplace along the line that people who've been involved with narcissists sometimes find themselves, acting, you begin to wonder which one of us is the narcissist. So people ask me all the time, they'll say, am I a narcissist? And you don't want to be quite so flippant as to say, well, the fact that you asked the question means no, because you'd hope that someday a real narcissist would actually ask that question. Yeah, that would be nice. On the other hand, the chances are good that you see narcissistic behavior in yourself, and you see, the responses of narcissistic victims from some of the people around you. So what's happening? Why are you acting that way? if you can work with the person and the person is open to say, oh wow, I see that, I see what I'm doing, and then begin to back away from that, then I would say that person's not a narcissist. That
Mm,
person maybe learned behavior as they
mm,
grew up, kind of what you said, especially from some of the young people that grow up in particularly abusive situations where their emotions and even their sense of identity has been, so manipulated. That's all they learned how to do. And we all know this, that you can walk with Jesus with a sincere heart and still act like a pagan most of the day, right? Because our normal responses in life come from what we used to be. They come from what we were trained to do before. You cut me off in traffic, you'll probably hear words I won't say from the pulpit.
uh,
I mean, that's the way life works. And so, yeah, I don't want to do that, but that's what comes out in times of stress. And so narcissistic behavior is something we see in ourselves in times of stress. The idea of pulling back, protecting myself, pushing everybody else away, being highly critical, perhaps snappy. If you're not feeling well, if somebody else is not feeling well, they snap at you. That's where a lot of that comes from. So I think it's helpful to me to tell people, are you acting like a narcissist,
mm.
or are you a narcissist? Because there's a difference.
So good. So good. Uh, on the subject of the cultural historical reference, I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least bring that into the conversation. Where does narcissism in a cultural historical reference come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. The old story of Narcissus and Echo is a kind of a fun story. Narcissus was a very handsome young man in Greek mythology, and in fact is the person we get the word Narcissus from, for the Narcissus flower. And very handsome, to the point where everybody told him how handsome he was, what a beautiful young man he was. Everybody loved him. Everybody would serve him and would give to him. And he began to own that. He began to believe that about himself. Now, the Greeks had I think, a fascinating ability to talk about psychological and sociological problems in these stories. And this one is fascinating to me, because one of the persons that are connected to Narcissus in the story is Echo. Well, if you remember, Echo talked too much. And so she was condemned by the gods to always, instead of being able to introduce her own things, she could only repeat what somebody else said. That was the idea of Echo. So Echo falls in love with Narcissus like everyone else did, right? And Narcissus thinks this is the greatest relationship of all, because here's this woman who doesn't talk to him, but she just repeats back to him what he says. Except that what he says is so dumb. Because when he says it, he doesn't like hearing it. It's not pleasant. He doesn't say nice things to other people. He's all about himself. So it feeds back to him this negative stuff that he's been saying to others. So now he sends her away. He condemns her. He doesn't want anything to do with her. And in grief, according to the story, she goes into the deep recesses of a cave and never comes out. And so that's why you can stand outside the cave and call her name and it'll come back to you, because she's way back. Anyway, it's a kind of a fun story. But the rest of the Narcissus story, of course, was that he saw his reflection in the pool one day and leaned over the pool, and people tried to get him away from the pool, but he fell in love with himself. And because he fell in love with himself, he couldn't pull himself away from his own image. And one day they went to see Narcissus by the pool, and he was gone. And this one version of the story says that he drowned in the pool. Another version says that he turned into the Narcissus flower. But the idea was that he's absorbed by his image. And again, a beautiful, a perfect illustration of what happens to this person who rejects himself, loves only the image, and then is consumed by the image. so that the real self behind the narcissist is probably lost forever and can't be pulled out. Now, I don't know. One of the things I try to say, I don't counsel narcissists. There are people who do that. They get paid a lot more than me, and they should. It's fascinating to me that one of the very few books that's out there, Wendy Behari's book, I can't remember the title right now, but it's a good book, and she is all about counseling narcissists. That's her thing, is counseling narcissists. But her book is all about victims of narcissism. Because counseling a narcissist is not something that I don't think you can formalize. I don't think you can put it down and say, here's how we walk a narcissist, to victory. I don't think that's something that can be done. I think practically, the best that can be done in counseling for a real narcissist is to learn how to adjust behavior on the basis of accepting that others are real, not feeling that others are real, that others are real people. That's that depersonalization again. Accepting that others are real, and I'm going to have to treat them as real, so I will adjust my behaviors. So what we talk about in terms of behavior management is probably the best that actually works for a narcissist. Changing their hearts to learn how to love. I don't know. Now, God can do what he wants to do. That's another whole question. That's different. But counseling, I don't think, is going to fix that. I don't think you can convince someone to love, or to, I don't think you can train somebody to empathize.
Well, it's a good thing we got Jesus.
Isn't that right?
Now, I do want to ask you this. All right. So why do narcissists feel the need to control their environments?
Yeah. One word. Fear.
Wow.
Narcissists are afraid. They are afraid of losing. That's why they're so desperate to control. That's a very simple answer. And I'll go to the wall for that one. The strongest narcissists out there. You talk about politicians. You talk about CEOs of big organizations. The people who are the most successful and most overtly narcissistic that you think of. They're the ones that are so big that you think nothing could hurt them. They're the ones that are the most afraid. They're afraid that they're going to get found out. They're going to get and there's all kinds of reasons. Number one, there's that little kid that's still hiding under the bed, right? There's that reality of weakness and abandonment and not being able to measure up and never being acceptable, that they owned. From whatever background they had, they owned that. And they can't ever let anyone see that. But there's also a whole lot of things that the narcissist does to get ahead. Narcissists are liars and cheaters. They don't care what rules they break. They don't care what people they hurt. Along the line, they leave a lot of dead bodies, and a lot of hurting people. And so the narcissist has a lot to be afraid of. They build their kingdoms, if you will, on the backs of others. So not only are they afraid that those people will come after them, but they're afraid they'll fail them. They're afraid. If you think of building a company, let's say even a small company, well, even a ministry, you think of building that with other people, and narcissists are very smart and are very very quick. Okay, they think quickly, they act quickly, and they usually act the way they want to act. They accomplish what they expect to accomplish, but they don't do their job. Okay, so the narcissist car salesman is not really a good car salesman in terms of long-term relationship with the business, long-term relationships with customers. Not really the kind of salesman you want. The narcissist politician doesn't read the bills. okay, is not the person that really knows what they're doing. They've got somebody for that, right? They got somebody that they can use for that. They don't write their own speeches, they don't do these kinds of things. Anyway, the narcissist tends to surround themselves with other people. Well, think about this now. You build a ministry on the backs of other people, the shoulders, let's say, on other people. What if they don't do their job? If they don't do their job, I'm going to fall, right? I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to crash and burn. So now I have to micromanage these people. Not because I know what they're doing. I don't know what their work is, I don't care. They're the minions. They, just do their work, supposedly. But because I don't want them to let me down. I'm afraid that they would let me down. So I have to ride herd on them. I have to get that extra hour out of them. I have to get that extra report. I have to criticize in such a way that they'll give me that 110%. And if they get used up, that's fine. I'll find somebody else, and bring that person in. But imagine living that way all the time. And then going home, okay, and have a wife who doesn't measure up, and kids who don't measure up, kids who might make you look bad. Again, think if you're a pastor, and your kids are found to be doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Oh my goodness, what's that going to look like? What are people going to think? All those things that we think mom used to say, that's what the narcissist says. So they're constantly afraid. We used to say that, wherever two or three are gathered, they're talking about me. So the narcissist, his goal is to control that conversation, right? There's two or three people out there. What are they talking about? Well, they're going to talk about me. So I'll go out and make sure they're talking about the right things about me. I'll go out and control that conversation. Now, I don't care if they talk smack about me, if they are negative about me, as long as they remember who controls them, as long as they remember who's in charge, as long as they don't bring me down and compromise me in the course of that conversation. I mean, it's a fascinating mindset. But imagine having to control everything all the time and worrying about how everything comes together.
Because it's all about the propagating of the image.
Yeah, it's all about that. That image must not crumble, must not fall. Yeah. It's a very precarious, and by the way, it takes a lot of energy to do that. It makes sense, right? What happens when you're spending lots of energy to accomplish something, and you're so focused on getting something that's precarious, you're worried about it falling, and somebody comes and says, "Hi, hon, would you like to go out for supper tonight?" Ah! People talk about narcissistic rage. There's a constant undercurrent of rage and anger for the narcissist. On one hand, he's very gracious and very kind, but almost like the flip of a switch, he can call you every name in the book and do every kind of backstabbing, awful thing to you. And you wonder, who is this person? Because he was just really nice the other day. And now what people ask is, what did I do to set that off? See, what did I cause? Did I do something wrong? And that's what, again, put yourself in a wife's position. If she's constantly living in fear of what she might do to set that off, then she learns that she's not acceptable as she is. Mm-hmm. She has to be somebody phony in order to make it. Most of us don't function very well. You don't get to start that as an adult and be very successful with that. That's why people work with children. To start that as an adult causes all kinds of disparity in our hearts and our minds, and eventually causes problems and doesn't work. I mean, I think it's fairly ineffective. But anyway, that's.
So is it common for people to feel that, old saying, walking on eggshells around the narcissist?
Oh yeah. Yeah. All the time. All the time. I hear that constantly from wives. Now, by the way, I've mentioned several times wives in relationship to narcissistic husbands.
Sure.
According to the literature, the number is something around 75%. I don't know if that's just so widely repeated that it has become the number, or if that's actually the result of some kind of study. I don't know the answer to that. It's certainly been my experience that it's even more than that. I think there's a couple of possible answers to that. One is
75% of
75% men.
narcissists are men. Okay.
Yeah. So generally, when we refer to narcissists, to use the male pronoun is going to work well.
Mm.
Okay. I think the reason for that is that in a male-dominated society, competition, striving against others is more productive than empathy and sympathy, right? We get rewarded for being aggressive. Now, I'm not against a male-dominated society. I mean, I'm an old-timer, so I value those kinds of things and those kinds of differences. But I think that we have to understand that when you reward ruthless behavior in leadership, you're going to get more ruthless behavior in leadership. That's the way that works. And people who find that easy are going to be drawn to that. So we have pastors, coming into a church and getting devoured by certain churches. And the guy that follows them, the narcissist, comes in and it is ready-made for him because he knows how to handle these people. He knows what to do. He sets up a kingdom that serves him. The church has been ready for it. And they're happy and he's happy, quote unquote, whereas other people can't function in that. I think we find more pastors, more politicians, more CEOs of companies, excuse me, among male leadership, partly because we reward that kind of behavior. We reward the aggression and, if you will, depersonalization. Men are much better at that, I think.
Now, let me ask this question just because it's in my mind and I'm actually very curious about this because I've had enough people come to me with reports about their narcissistic mother.
Uh-huh.
Maybe the father's a bit more distant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the mother's a recipient of abuse,
Mm-hmm.
but the child experiences the narcissistic mother. Now, do you think that in certain relationships, there may be a tendency for women to experience the narcissistic tendencies of the husband while the children experience the narcissistic tendencies of the mother? Or is that just happenstance, coincidence in my, I'm very...
No, I think that happens. I think that happens because mom passes it down. Again, it's what works in the system. And, a woman who is in relationship with a narcissist has to play the game. You either play the game or get out. I mean, there's almost no in between there. And playing the game means you run the kids. I think probably it'd be an interesting thing to go back and do some research. What percentage of family homes have one narcissist versus two? Many have two. It's surprising how many narcissists are drawn to each other. That's, again, people don't think that's a natural. It doesn't make sense. Why would a narcissist be drawn to another narcissist? Because the little kid under the bed wants to believe that they can be accepted, that they could be welcomed. And what is the narcissist good at? Making people feel like they're accepted and wanted and valued. So another narcissist comes along and begins to pull that little child out from under the bed. And pretty soon you've got two narcissists in a relationship. Fascinating. Anyway, there's another answer to your question that's probably more likely. And that is that women in our culture aren't as aggressive and aren't as rewarded for being aggressive. That's changing for sure. But if you talk about our mothers and grandmothers and those generations behind us, their forms of manipulation were much more what we call covert, right? They were covert narcissists. They were ones who manipulated and adjusted your value and identity by little comments. Okay, so I'll say that the narcissist is the guy who comes into your house and says, man, this place is a mess. You ought to do some things and get this place cleaned up. That's the overt narcissist. The covert narcissist is the mother-in-law who comes to visit the grandchildren and brings her rubber gloves and buckets and scrubbing materials along with her. Okay, now she's not saying anything overtly. She's not being critical. She's just there to help. So the covert narcissist is very difficult to identify because they look like they're helpful people. And if you try to accuse them of anything, they say, well, but I was just trying to be kind. I was just trying to be understanding. I mean, I know you're burdened as a young mother. I'm just here to help. But what she communicating, every young wife knows exactly what she's communicating. She's still communicating, your place is a mess and you really should get it fixed up. They're saying exactly the same thing, but they're doing it differently. So I think women develop that kind of ability to criticize and to say things in a different way, because that has been more rewarded. Now, I know people will say, well, that's sexist talk and all that. I'm sorry, maybe it is. It's part of a generation probably past. I'm not sure that's going to be continuing very well. But it's what most people have experienced.
Let me tell you, in my generation, I learned I better know how to cook.
That's right.
I better know how to cook. You can't roll the dice on that one.
No.
And I got lucky. My wife can cook.
Yeah.
But you got to be prepared. You better know how to clean. You better know how to cook. Otherwise.
That's right. And if you do cook, you better clean, right?
Now, just for kind of fleshing this out a little bit more. In your example, you talk about the overt narcissist versus the covert narcissist on the subject of cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just picking on this example, which is really, really good. If a person's house is a mess, what is the non-narcissist going to do in order to communicate this place is a mess and it needs to be cleaned up, because maybe it really is? Right.
And that's a good question. How do I do that and not make people think I'm trying to control them? And that's the answer. I mean, you come and you say, I would say you give the result of your effort over to someone else, right? Over to the Lord is what I would say. So I would go into some place and I would say, it looks to me like you're overwhelmed. Can you use some help?
That's good.
Is there some way? And if they say no, in fact, I'm offended. Hey, I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend, just offering and help, some help. And a lot of offers to help are refused. You understand that. But some are accepted and much appreciated. So how do you do that? You do that, the old thing is you earn the place to make the criticism. You don't offer the criticism without a solution that you're willing to contribute to. Because, by the way, the mother-in-law who brings her gloves and cleaning supplies will cheer her daughter-in-law on as the daughter-in-law does the cleaning. But mom won't actually do a lot of cleaning. She'll play with the kids, and she'll come over and check on the daughter-in-law and see how things are going once in a while, But the daughter-in-law will when mom leaves, the daughter-in-law will be exhausted because she's been doing all the work. Mom will take all the credit of helping, when the truth is mom played with the kids most of the time. Again, fascinating personalities.
So why is it that narcissists find it so hard to feel compassion? Where's that break?
Yeah. I think two things. Again, one is compassion makes us feel vulnerable. We've got to open ourselves to receive other people in. The other thing is we find it difficult to respect other people who are weak. Okay, when you judge somebody else as being weak, it's hard to respect them. So now the narcissist does not want to feel weak, does not want to feel sad, for example. So a common story is the wife's parent will die. The narcissist husband he'll do his duty in terms of showing up for the funeral and that kind of stuff, but then settle it with, okay, now that's over, can we go home? Just a total bland, uncaring kind of thing. And the wife is shocked by the fact that it doesn't seem to bother him that her father has just died. Well, no, it actually doesn't. And in fact, he doesn't want it to. It won't bother him when his own family dies. He will push that away, those feelings, as much as possible, because those feelings make him feel weak. Others who exhibit those feelings just show themselves to be weak, and he has no respect for them.
Wow.
So the boss of the small company, the wife loses her husband and says, "Oh, I can't come to work now." He's, okay, how long are you going to be gone? Because that's all that matters to him. And he's not about to care or to respect the fact that it's, going to be deep on her heart. That doesn't connect with him. And he's never going to let it connect, because the price of that connection is too high. And we all know that. We all know that the price of compassion is significant. We might actually have to do something. We might actually have to spend some time to give something of ourselves. The narcissist doesn't want to do that. Not interested.
That's so good. And what I hear a lot, like, as you describe the narcissist, is just the term self-protection. That's something that actually a lot of people struggle with, is the issue of, can I let Jesus be my protector?
Oh boy, yeah.
Because if I was hurt, if I was abused, if I went through trauma, if I endured an injustice and Jesus didn't stop it then, what the heck am I going to put my trust in now? Can I trust Jesus? And many people at one level or another, even if you're deep into subconscious, are saying, no way, Jose. Don't trust God to be my protector. Must protect myself.
Right.
I've battled with this one.
Sure.
I've battled with this one.
Yeah.
And to the point where it really, really hurt, like to put the trust out there as the wounds are coming in. And it's like, hey,
yeah.
What's the connection between self-protection and the feeling that God will fail them for the narcissist?
Yeah. It makes me think of an old Chuck Smith quote that I heard on the radio 30 years ago, probably. And it was one of those that is just absolutely profound and I don't know what at the same time. He said, every time I've given God a deadline, he's missed it. And I've never forgotten that. The narcissist can't afford to have God miss his deadlines, right?
Oh my God.
I'm not placing my faith over there. I got to make sure that deadline, because I don't want to look bad. I mean, we see it on TV every day when we watch the politicians. There was a meme or a little political cartoon of all the politicians now that are scouring their yearbooks to try to find what they might have done wrong in the past. They're desperate to make sure they don't look bad. They can't afford to look bad, and so you can't just trust others to make you look good. They might fail. you know. So now what about us as Christians? Isn't that part of the learning process? I think real Christian growth
Mm.
happens, and real Christian victory happens when you learn not to see failure as a bad thing.
Wow.
Embrace failure, and you recognize that sometimes failure is the part of the walk God wanted you to see and wanted you to experience. That's tough. That's tough. I've had to close a church. I mean, there's nothing worse for a pastor than to have a church that he's been serving close.
Mm.
You get this big capital L on your forehead. At least you feel like you've got this big capital L on your forehead. Were there things I could have done to fix this? You live with that for the next 20 years trying to figure this out. What did I do? Who can I blame? Always kind of knowing that the real blame must be mine, right? I must have failed. And pastors have things that they say. If you've been there longer than 7 years, all the problems are yours. You can't blame your predecessor anymore, that kind of stuff. And the real answer is, yeah, I probably failed. And you know what? Because I fail, I need a savior.
Mm.
I need a savior. If it's up to me, it ain't gonna be. It's not going to happen. Those nice little platitudes don't work in real life. And the truth is, failure is part of the game. Failure is part of the Christian walk regularly. It is a normal part of the Christian walk. Every time it should drive us back and make us say, thank you, Jesus. This, I see how much I need you. I can't pat myself on the back for any of this. This is you, your kindness, your favor, your power. I'm going to give that all to you. Failure is part of the game, but not for the narcissist, because the image must be maintained. If the image fails, remember, it's never the narcissist that's criticized. It's always the image that's criticized. If the image fails, what do we do? What else is there? There is no backup. There is no one else, which of course raises another big question about, can a narcissist actually be a Christian? But we can get to that another time.
So that's really, really good. So I want to spend a little bit more time on the subject of marriage, and you've said a lot already and given a lot of examples, but I mean, you go into even more in your book on this subject, and so what are some of the, let's just say this, okay? What are some of the things that a person that is listening to this and thinks, oh, I may be married to a narcissist, should look for? And, maybe this will also translate for at least a few of the narcissists out there, actual narcissists, and say, whoa, maybe the Holy Spirit is penetrating my heart on this one. This is actually me. Go ahead.
Let me answer the first question. And then if I forget, you bring me back to the second part, okay? I would ask somebody who's thinking, I wonder if I'm in a narcissistic marriage. I would ask, what will you do if you are? Okay? What's interesting is there are people who try to dissect their marriage, to try to understand what is happening and why, but they have no part two. They can't do anything about it. Are you going to get a divorce? Is that is that where you're going with this? What are you thinking? What's the rest? And so a lot of times I'll have people say, oh no, absolutely not. I don't care how this question is answered. I'll never get a divorce. Okay. So then we don't need to answer that question. What we need to do is to look at what's happening in the marriage. Again, forget the diagnosis. Look at what's happening and how can you protect yourself and keep yourself healthy. So, my counseling always is, if you're being physically abused, get out. Period. Divorce is another question. That's another step. Getting out of the proximity of the abuser is step one. Get out of there. You're not going to find health if you're being physically abused. That's not going to happen. So the first step to get healthy is to separate yourself that way. Now, if that's not happening, and it rarely does, by the way, in narcissistic marriages, the general rule of thumb is that not all narcissists are abusers, physical abusers. Okay, almost all physical abusers are narcissists. So it's a matter of set limits, right? I mean, it's one set is large, and an inside set is smaller. Abusers tend to depersonalize the people they abuse, so they're very likely narcissistic. There's other reasons for abuse besides narcissism, but it's narcissistic behavior in any case. You can't hit somebody without having some sense of, at least not somebody who's weak, somebody who's dependent on you. In a fight, that's different. But you don't slap your wife without having a certain narcissistic, attitude and depersonalization. But narcissists aren't all abusers in terms of physical abuse, but they're all abusive in the way they treat other people because of that depersonalization. Your emotions don't matter to me. Your desires, your needs, none of those things matter. And in fact, how my words affect you don't matter. If they accomplish the purpose that I want them to accomplish, that's all that matters. So they're very abusive in the language that they use, very abusive in the manipulation and that kind of stuff. So what are you going to do about that? That's my question. How are you going to handle that in your life if somebody is abusive and you can't now, you've decided you're not going to get away, or you're not going to give yourself that option? And that is to maintain a distance. I don't know if some of your listeners will watch things like Downton Abbey and get the sense of the old, century-old British marriage relationship. It's the classic, for the most part, 2 beds, separate lives. The wife has her little responsibilities. The husband has his little responsibilities. That didn't stop genuine love. It was just a very different definition than what we have today. In our idea, genuine love has all kinds of intertwined emotions and all kinds of intertwined thinking and all that. That wasn't true actually for most of history. In most of history, the husband and wife maintained a certain distance emotionally that allowed them each to be who they were. Mom ran the farmhouse. The dad was out there working. He came in. She was supposed to have the meal. She had the meals. He was supposed to keep his dirty boots outside. He did that. They had certain things that they handled back and forth, and it worked for them without the intertwining. That's not a great word, but I think it's a picture actually of their emotions. You can't afford to let the narcissist manipulate your emotions. That's what's unhealthy in the relationship. So how do you deal with that? What does that look like for you? And one of the things you do is you make sure you give yourself time. If it's at all possible, find a way to go for a walk, to have a special place in the house. This is normal counseling for me. I say, go, have a little place in the house that's kind of your spot, a place in the backyard. Have some friends if that's at all possible. Join a club, exercise, a library club, something that's not a lot of time and energy. You can handle it. But you meet people and you connect with people who value you. Somebody who says you do a good job, when back at home you're almost completely convinced you do nothing right. So find ways to feed that need outside of the marriage. It sounds, let's say it sounds very sad.
Yes, it does.
It does. It sounds very sad. But if you're absolutely committed that you must stay in the relationship, then you've got to find ways to be healthy in the midst of that relationship. The other thing I say is that our narcissists, although they're almost always predictable, their behavior can be predicted. The wives know by the way her husband drives home, okay, or whatever, they know what happened at work, or they know these kinds of things. So you can predict to a certain extent what narcissists think, but that narcissistic rage, that bizarre behavior that a lot of narcissists present, that can't always be predicted. So I tell women, I say, look, if you get $5 that you're not accountable for, put it away. Put it in a drawer. Put it someplace. And if you get another $20, put that away. And see if you can't have, and now this isn't an ultimate control situation, okay? Most wives can simply, tuck away some money. But I say, look, have enough money to get a motel room. Have enough money for a good tank of gas. Enough to get you to your folks, enough to get you to somebody, who cares about you and you can be with them. And if not even that, enough to get you and the kids to a motel for the night. Something where it's there. You may never have to use it, but the peace and the confidence, the health that comes from knowing you have it will be substantial. Knowing you could leave if you wanted to, if you had to. That's a pretty big deal. Almost everybody that talks about the despair in abusive relationships despairs because they don't see any way of escape. So even having a possibility of escape, have the number for the women's center downtown that will put you up for the night. Have that phone number someplace. Memorize something, And I know these women's centers are usually, very liberal, very, they have their own problems, but someplace, somebody, that you can go talk to. So that's.
And I want to ask a follow-up question to this. Okay, have you noticed patterns of, I guess, fallout patterns within people that were in narcissistic, abusive marital relationships? If they wind up getting divorced and find themselves on the other side of that, what do those look like?
You'd be absolutely amazed at how many of them go right back to another narcissist. And I've talked to people who've been married 3 times. All of them are narcissists. And they're like, what in the world is wrong with me? Well, at that point, that's a really reasonable question to ask. I mean, I want to be gracious, but what is it that, that opens up? Well, basically, the narcissist didn't meet the needs that you thought they were meeting, So you thought that this narcissist was accepting you and loving you, and you had so strong of needs to have that happen in your life that you gave yourself over to this person without paying attention to the red flags that you saw, ignoring the red flags that your support people brought. You pushed right ahead and you took what you thought they were offering and then found out they weren't offering. You got rid of that guy. Now you get another one and you find out maybe this guy did the same thing to you. He just did it a little differently. He used the bad narcissist you just got away from as the negative example and was smart enough to present himself. But you projected a vulnerability that they capitalized on. A vulnerability that was probably, and by the way, I think we're talking about 90% of the time, that's off the top of my head, it's not a matter of study, a vulnerability that was built into that person as a child. Okay, so again, coming out of narcissistic family relationships, it's very common for a young woman particularly to find a narcissistic husband and then another narcissistic husband after that. Now, the amazing thing and the good part of all of this in our day is because this disorder has been talked about enough, and the internet has been an amazing tool to get this information in a surreptitious way, right? Nobody quite knows what you're reading, and so now they're learning what's been happening, and they learn how to protect themselves, and so some very good things, I think, are happening. And remember, everything that I say is out of a Christian perspective. So we're talking about Christian. When I'm talking about Christian marriages. I know there's marriages in general. There's a ton of information on narcissism out there in the secular world. But everything that I teach and talk about is in a context of a Christian relationship. So these are good church people, right? So, and I want to toss that in because it kind of brings us back to a little bit different flavor here.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, there are different standards for behavior depending on what people group you're looking at.
Yeah, right.
My gosh. All right. So there's a whole lot of stuff that I want to talk about because you have a whole book on narcissism in the church, dealing with narcissistic parents. We didn't really cover that. Dealing with narcissistic bosses, other narcissistic leaders, healing from narcissistic abuse. This is what I'm going to do, Dr. Orson. I am going to invite you back for a round two on this subject. And folks, he has a book called Narcissism in the Church. And I'm going to let you, Dr. Orson, give us your website and any other contact information you want to leave.
Sure.
So that people that have been listening to this can follow up.
Excellent. So I've been doing a blog for a long time. The blog is a WordPress blog, so it's www.graceformyheart, and then purposely changed one word, and sometimes that's confusing, but graceformyheart.wordpress.com. It's a hosted, they host the site, so it's a .com site. Also, I have my own website that we've just completely redesigned, so it's just new. I've got almost 1,000 posts on narcissism and grace. So I'm a grace teacher primarily, but lots of posts on narcissism, and so I'm trying to get those organized and get it in a helpful way to people. But that website is Grace for the Heart, which is the name of our ministry, gracefortheheart.org. So people are welcome to go to both of those. The book is on Amazon, as you say, Narcissism in the Church, A Heart of Stone in Christian Relationships, which seems to fit very well. And it's a very different kind of book, I think. It's basically stories and then explaining. Part of what my goal is in the book is simply to help people explain what in the world has been happening, whether it's in my family, my Christian mother who can quote scripture to me all the time and then rip my heart out with her hands. I mean, what is that? My Christian husband who's an elder in the church and an abuser at home. What is that? How does that happen in a Christian context? My Christian pastor who's supposed to take care of, the people, who's supposed to be this godly man who flirts with me after the service, or I was the youth pastor and I was totally abused. What was that? Maybe even the pastor himself who looks at denomination and says, here we are, a group of friends together, and when I have a struggle, I'm kicked to the curb, and these guys don't even acknowledge me. What the heck is that? So I suppose if there's one question I'm trying to answer, it's what the heck is that?
Well, there you have it, folks. We're going to have Dr. Orson back, so just hold on to your horses. It's been a pleasure having you and hosting you on the podcast, and folks, that's it. So until next time, God bless and Godspeed. You've been listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and share this with friends. This podcast is a production of Bride Ministries International. Visit our website at brideministriesinternational.com to enjoy the Bride Ministries Church, the Bride Ministries Institute, free resources, and to support us financially.